Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. We're going to be talking about, well, Canada as we head into 2025. I think a lot of people are kind of like, whoa, what's going on? There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of information flying around. And I think what we want to try and do today is help you cut through that, get to some clear, fact-based understanding of some of the big things that are being talked about, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And what's really cool is one of our listeners sent in, or shared rather, a post from Facebook that really caught our eye. And it's a response to a post, and it's this really thoughtful look at some of the common frustrations and anxieties that people have about Canada right now. It's not just like a rant. It's a genuine attempt to look at, okay, here are some of the things people are worried about. Are they valid? What's the actual data say? And maybe even more importantly, like, who's actually in charge of this stuff? Which level of government? Because that gets really confusing sometimes.
It totally does. I mean, you hear people blaming, the feds, you hear people blaming the province, the cities. It's like, who do we even talk to about this?
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that response to the Facebook post is kind of our roadmap today. We're going to unpack these different claims, these worries, see what the reality actually looks like, and figure out who is supposed to be dealing with this.
Exactly.
So we're going to hit all the big ones, right? Healthcare. I mean, can we even get a doctor? How long do we have to wait for surgery? Everyone's talking about housing. Can we afford a place to live? The cost of food, mental health, everyone's struggling, crime, what's going on with that? And immigration. Big, big topic.
Yeah, all interconnected too.
Huge. And we don't just want to throw stats at you, right? We want to make sense of it. Like,
Yeah.
Who's responsible and how are we actually doing compared to other countries, right? Like, are we really as bad off as sometimes it feels?
Yeah, good question. Important perspective.
So let's start with healthcare, because this is one that I think everyone is really feeling right now. And the Facebook response that was shared, it mentioned that a big percentage of Canadians don't even have a family doctor. And then the ones who do are waiting forever for surgery. And it also talks about how mental health, since the pandemic, things have just exploded.
Yeah. And that anxiety, that worry about access to care is real.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what jumps out from this post. People are worried.
Yeah.
They can't find a doctor. The surgeries are delayed. And if you look at the numbers, it's about 1 in 5 Canadians right now who say they don't have a regular family doctor. And those non-urgent surgeries, waiting several months, that's pretty common, unfortunately. And like the post said, mental health challenges, they have skyrocketed since the pandemic hit. It's a huge concern.
So, I mean, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because you hear people blaming different levels of government. So who do we hold accountable here? Like, if we want to see changes in healthcare, who do we even talk to?
Right. And I think the key thing to understand about healthcare in Canada is the actual delivery of it. Like the people in the hospitals and clinics, the waiting lists, the day-to-day stuff, that's mainly the responsibility of the provinces. So each province,
Oh, okay.
the federal government kicks in a lot of money, don't get me wrong, through these things called transfer payments, but they don't actually run the show on the ground.
Huh.
So that's why, like the Facebook post mentioned, your experience with healthcare could be totally different depending on if you live in BC, Ontario, Nova Scotia, wherever. Each province, their health ministry, they call the shots, basically.
So it's not like one big, Canada Health just running everything as all these different provinces doing their own thing. Okay, interesting. Now, the post also brought up life expectancy. This is a big one. It said that it's dropped 4 years. And that sounds terrifying. Are we all going to die 4 years sooner?
Yeah, that's a scary stat, and it's actually not quite right. It's important to be careful about these dramatic numbers. There was a little dip in life expectancy during COVID, but the post got it right. It's more like 0.4 years, not a huge drop. And the good news is it's starting to climb back up. Right now, it's around 81.6 years. So it's still pretty high compared to the rest of the world.
Okay, phew. So not a total disaster. But what determines that, how long we live? Is it just healthcare or is there more to it?
It's way more complicated than just one thing. It's a whole bunch of factors. And both federal and provincial governments have a hand in it. So your healthcare system, as we said, that's mostly provincial. But then you've got chronic diseases, things like heart disease, diabetes, and then what we call the social determinants of health, stuff like income, education. All that plays into how long people live.
Yeah.
And both levels of government are involved in trying to improve those things.
Okay, so it's a big web. It's not just if we fix healthcare, everyone will live to 100.
Right. Much more nuanced.
Okay, let's talk housing. This is a big one. And the Facebook post, it mentioned that average home prices are over $700,000, which sadly I can believe. I mean, especially in places like Toronto, Vancouver, it's just Crazy expensive.
Yeah, and the Post is right on the money there. The average across Canada is around $710,000.
Wow.
And in those hot markets, Toronto, Vancouver, yeah, forget about it. It's way higher. And it's not just buying, like the Post said, renting is a nightmare too. People are really struggling to find affordable places to live.
So who's going to fix this? I mean, is this a federal problem, provincial, city? Like, where does the power lie to actually make a difference here?
This is one where it's shared for sure, but I'd say the provinces and especially the cities, they hold most of the cards because it comes down to things like zoning. What can you build where? And then permits. Like, how easy is it to get approval to actually build something new? That all falls under the cities, the municipalities. And that has a huge impact on how much housing there's available. The feds, they do play a role. They set immigration targets, which obviously affects how many people need housing.
Right. More people, more demand.
Exactly. And they do some funding for housing initiatives, but they don't actually control like how many houses get built, where they get built. That's mostly up to the provinces and cities.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, another really big one from the Post was food insecurity. They said that something like 1 in 4 Canadians are struggling to afford groceries and millions are using food banks. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really tough to hear that. And the Post is right to bring attention to this problem, but we do need to look carefully at those numbers. It is true that around 18% of Canadians are in households that are food insecure. But that number about food banks, that's actually the number of visits every month. And it did go over 2 million in 2023. So that's a lot of people needing help. But it doesn't necessarily mean 2 million different people. Some folks might have to go back multiple times in a month.
Right. That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's causing this? Like, why are so many people struggling to put food on the table?
At the heart of it, it's about income. People not having enough money to afford the basics. And that makes it a shared responsibility between the federal and provincial governments. So the feds, they have programs like the Canada Child Benefit, the GST rebates, that's putting money in people's pockets. But then the provinces, they control things like welfare rates, minimum wage. That has a huge impact on whether people can afford to live. And then, of course, there's inflation, which is affected by stuff happening all over the world, but it hits everyone's wallets here at home.
It's all connected. It's never just one thing, is it?
Yep.
Okay, mental health, huge topic. The Post mentioned that like 35% of Canadians are dealing with mental health issues. And yeah, it feels like you can't go anywhere these days without hearing about it.
Yeah, it's definitely top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that number is pretty accurate. About 1 in 3 Canadians say they're struggling with their mental health. And like the Post pointed out, getting help, affordable help, that's a major barrier.
Yeah, for sure. So whose job is it to fix this? Like, if someone needs mental health support, who do they turn to?
Most of the mental health services, they're run by the provinces. So each province has their own system.
Okay.
The feds do chip in some funding for different mental health programs and strategies, but there's a growing feeling, and I think the Facebook post really captured this, that it's too disjointed. Like the feds and the provinces need to be working way more closely together to really make a difference in mental health.
Yeah, it can't just be like throwing money at the problem. It's got to be coordinated.
Exactly.
Okay, crime. Everyone's worried about crime, especially with all the stuff you see on social media. The Post talked about violent crime, homicides, break-ins, car thefts. Like, is it actually getting worse, or is that just, the internet blowing things out of proportion?
Well, it's not just the internet. Some of those stats are unfortunately true. Homicide rates, for example, and car thefts, those are definitely up. Especially in the bigger cities, you see that trend. Violent crime, it has gone up in some places, but overall, it's still lower than it was back in the 90s.
Okay, so not as bad as it maybe was in the past, but still not great. So when we talk about crime, who's in charge? Like, who makes the laws? Who enforces them? Who decides, if someone gets arrested or let go?
It's a bit of a maze for sure. But generally, when we talk about preventing crime, the local police, that's handled by the cities and the provinces. The feds, they're in charge of the big picture stuff, like changing the criminal code, and they oversee the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Post also mentioned this idea of catch and release, where people get arrested and then they're right back out on the street. That's often because of decisions made by judges in provincial courts about bail conditions. And while the feds can set laws around bail, it's the provincial crown, prosecutors, and judges who actually interpret and apply those laws in their courtrooms.
So it's like layers of complexity.
Totally.
Okay, last big one, immigration. This is always a hot topic. And the Post, it talked about this idea that the government wants to bring in like 100 million more people. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. Is that even remotely true?
Yeah, that's definitely not true. That number's way off. The Facebook post was right to debunk that. Canada's plan, the actual plan from the federal government, is to welcome around 500,000 new permanent residents every year by 2025. That 100 million number, that seems like it came from some hypothetical scenario that a think tank put out, not from the government at all.
Okay, so good to clear that up. So the feds set the targets. They say, okay, we want this many newcomers, but then what? Like, who helps them actually settle in, find a place to live, learn English or French, all that stuff?
That's where it gets interesting, because while the big immigration policy comes from the feds, the nitty-gritty of actually helping people integrate, that often falls on the provinces and the cities. They're the ones who have to provide the settlement services, the housing, the language training, the education, even the healthcare. And that's where things are getting a bit sticky, because you've got the feds saying, okay, we want all these newcomers, and then the provinces and cities are like, hold on, we don't have the resources to support all these people.
Yeah, that's a recipe for problems.
Exactly. So there needs to be much better communication and collaboration between the different levels of government to make sure that immigration works for everyone.
Yeah, it can't just be like, okay, you deal with it. It's got to be a team effort.
Absolutely.
So the response to the Facebook post, it didn't just focus on Canada in isolation. It actually tried to compare us to other big wealthy nations. Specifically, it looked at the G5, which is the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Japan. Kind of like, how are we stacking up against the other big players?
Right. And I think that's a valuable exercise because it gives you a broader perspective. Instead of just looking at our problems in a vacuum, it's like, okay, how are other countries dealing with these same issues? So they looked at a bunch of different things, like the pandemic response, for example. Canada, we actually did better than the US, the UK, and France when it came to COVID deaths per million people. We did have more than Japan, though. So not perfect, but definitely not the worst.
Interesting. What about the economy? Like, how's our economy doing compared to these other countries?
Well, in 2021 and 2022, we had some pretty strong GDP growth, bouncing back from the pandemic.
Okay.
Things did slow down in 2023, but we managed to avoid a recession. And the projections for 2025, they look fairly stable. But the Post pointed out something concerning, which is that our GDP per capita, that's basically how much each person contributes to the economy, that's gone down. And that's not a good sign.
No, that means people are, like, individually worse off.
Exactly. And then when you look at unemployment, our rate is higher than the U.S. and puts us kind of on the higher end of the G5. But there is a silver lining. Real wages did go up between 2019 and 2023. So people are making a bit more money, which is good.
Okay, that's good. What about, like, the overall financial situation? Like debt, inflation, how are we doing compared to these other countries?
Well, our gross debt, that's the total amount of money the government owes, that is pretty high. But when you look at net debt, which takes into account our assets, our net debt to GDP ratio is actually quite low compared to other G7 nations. So that suggests that our overall financial position is relatively strong. And on inflation, we've managed to bring it down from that peak we saw. And our current rate is pretty much in line with the Bank of Canada's target. And it's similar to what the U.S. is seeing. So doing okay on that front.
Okay, that's good to hear. What about climate change? I mean, everyone's talking about climate action. How does Canada compare to these other countries?
We've set some pretty ambitious targets for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but when they look at our actual progress, we're currently rated as insufficient. So that means we're not doing enough to actually meet those targets.
Uh-oh.
Countries like Germany and France, they're generally seen as being further ahead when it comes to taking real action on climate change. So we've got some catching up to do there.
Yeah, we need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly.
So, big picture, how would you sum up Canada's performance on the world stage? Like, are we the shining example? Are we the basket case? Or somewhere in between?
I think the Facebook post got it right. It's a mixed bag. We've got some things to be proud of, like our fiscal position, the fact that we got inflation under control. Our initial response to the pandemic was pretty good. But we're lagging behind in other areas like unemployment and economic growth per person. We're not always at the top, but we're definitely not at the bottom either. We're somewhere in the middle.
The middle ground. Okay, so if we had to distill, one key takeaway for our listeners from all of this, from that Facebook post and from all the stuff we've talked about today, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing is, we've got some real challenges in Canada right now, but it's way too simplistic to just point the finger at one level of government or one political party and say it's their fault. It's way more complicated than that. Like the Facebook post said, healthcare, that's mostly provincial. Housing, that's a lot of provincial and city control. Cost of living, that's kind of everyone's problem. Crime, that's a lot of local and provincial responsibility, although the feds do have some say.
It's not like there's one easy answer, one magic bullet.
Nope. And these aren't problems that are going to be solved overnight. It's going to take a lot of long-term effort, a lot of collaboration between the different levels of government, and it has to go beyond just winning the next election, right? It has to be a sustained commitment to actually making things better.
Yeah, we need everyone on board for the long haul.
Absolutely.
So I keep coming back to this question that was in that Facebook post, which is, are we really falling apart? I mean, there's a lot of negativity out there, a lot of doom and gloom. Are we actually holding it together better than it sometimes seems?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask ourselves. And maybe an even better question for our listeners to think about is, what does holding it together even look like? Like, what's your vision for Canada? And what role do you want the different levels of government to play in achieving that vision?
That's a great question. And I think that's a perfect place to leave things today. So thanks to everyone for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this has given you a better understanding of what's really going on in Canada, who's responsible for what, and how we compare to the rest of the world. We really encourage you to take this information, do your own research, and most importantly, think critically about everything you hear and read.
Absolutely. Question everything. And don't just accept things at face value. Think about where the information is coming from, who's saying it, and what their agenda might be. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore, so keep those conversations going. And until next time, thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Take care.
Bye for now.